All right, hi, Dominic Bruno here again. So I will show you my video exercise number 3. For this one, what I decided to do was to continue working with my AP Lit and Comp classes, doing a practical lesson, one that I've done before, um, just obviously not having used Captivate as the means of doing it. So what we're going to be doing with this one is just practicing what it means to actually closely read. A lot of my students come into AP Lit knowing I mean, they all know how to read by the time they get to a college level senior English class, but how to read the AP way is something that we oftentimes talk about. And so that involves close reading. I would be doing this lesson not right away, early in the school year. We would have been practicing close reading up until this point, and this would just be a continuation. Here we're going to use a passage from a past AP Lit exam back from 2003, free response question number 2, based on a passage from a short story called The Other Paris. All right, so there's some context for you for what I was doing. So step 1, with any close reading, and again, what I have to keep in mind is that I'm prepping them to read in a high pressure environment and write essays where they have to write 3 essays in 2 hours. Um, So my advice to them is to always read twice. The passages, like you can see here, are short. So typically, students, by the time they take the exam in May, do have time to read these sorts of passages twice. The first time they read it, I tell them to not even look at the prompt. Now, some will ignore that advice, but I tell them just read it and try to comprehend as much as you can. So what I would do in class is I would ask them to actually do that right here. I'd probably even give them a handout that doesn't have the prompt on it. And I would just say, read this, make as much sense of it as you possibly can. So in class, there would be a pause here. They would read. Then I would ask them for some comprehension level questions. So I did randomize the questions. I did allude to in my discussion response the fact that when I do ask questions, I do try to have a purposeful order to them um, to mimic what the AP exam does. So I kind of build from comprehension to characterization or theme to then overall interpretation. So I do try to build in complexity, but here I just kept them all kind of superficial, comprehension based. So how long did Carol and Howard know each other before Howard proposed to Carol? Now, what this passage is a ridiculous satirical commentary on the pressures that society puts on people to marry too early. So if they read this, they would catch this detail, it would stand out to them. They'd only known each other less than 3 weeks. Next question. Despite Carol's efforts at efficiently falling in love with Howard, nothing seemed to be working. So, what did she blame those failures on? And again, this is meant to be the satirical voice of the writer. She blamed it on the weather. She thought as soon as the weather just got a little bit nicer, they'd truly fall in love. All right, next up. I want to get a sense of, do they recognize the voice, or did they read this really literally? If they read this passage and came away from it thinking like, man, what a beautiful love story, uh, that would suggest a misreading, and then that would lead to a problematic essay because they didn't pick up on the voice. So my true or false question is based on my initial reading of this passage. I know that gallant social commentary is one that praises the manner in which people fall in love. If that's what I thought, if I said true, I'd see, oh, you're not quite ready to do a second close reading yet because you'd be way off. Now, I don't want them to get this wrong. Like, I want them to see that. So I'm not going to have them submit it. They need to know that that's false. Otherwise, we can't really go any further. We talk about it in class, obviously, if they misread that. That's kind of the point, though, of practice. So we'll submit it. I'll get 100%. I don't want to penalize anybody at this stage as we're just practicing, so I was going to force them to get 100%. All right, we'll continue from here. Now, on this next slide, I've embedded a video. I'll pause it here for a minute. This comes from the College Board's website. They have a YouTube channel for every content area. So this is the AP Lit and Comp YouTube channel. They came out with this in 2020 when things pretty much across the country shut down and moved to fully remote. So here, step 2, after they've done the reading, is you're going to want to go back to that passage and employ close reading skills to read it a second time and annotate and set yourself up to be able to write an essay. So here, this is a video and it's lengthy. So what I would tell them in class is, hey, if you need the reminders, because remember, I'd be doing this lesson more so in the middle of the school year. So if you need the reminders about what exactly does Mr. Bruno mean when he keeps harping on close reading, well, here's an almost hour-long video that takes you through 3 steps of how to dig deeper and truly read actively. So this is something I would use as a resource, something that's additional to the content that I'm teaching in class. So I'll play it a little bit so you can get a sense of what it sounds like.
Hi, y'all, and welcome back to AP Literature Live. This is Wendy Scruggs. I teach AP Literature and Composition at Jack Britt High School in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I am so excited that you will be here with me.
And if nothing else, the students oftentimes get a kick out of just hearing a different voice from Mr. Bruno. So this would be a change of pace from what they hear in the classroom. All right, but you can see she talks about surface level. That's what we just did. Read one time, pick up on all the surface level stuff. By level 3, though, she's digging deeply.
Let your thoughts have room to expand. Okay, don't think about I have to be in this little tiny box in my thinking. Because
all right, so yeah, I recommend watching it though if you're a big reader. All right, so she takes you through. She applies the close reading strategies to poetry. She also later on looks at a prose passage as well, and they're all from past AP exams, just like I'm doing. So it truly is meant to just be a helpful additional resource for students who need it. All right. After that, before the third step where they actually go and do the close reading, all this stuff, the video that I just showed you has been getting ready to transition from first read to second read. I would want them, because they have to write analytically, ultimately, is I'd want them to practice. Just check. Do you know what these elements of language are in actual practice, not just by definition? So I've got Carol, who would have imagined quite sincerely a scene that involved all these beautiful Parisian scenes as the setting for where Howard proposed to her. They would have to have read the whole passage to recognize that that's not actually what happened. That was her imagination. He actually proposed over lunch. It wasn't very romantic. But anyways, what I'm focusing on is the language here. So that's visual imagery. So I'm going to drag and drop that. Carol and Howard were both vaguely Protestant. This is the author directly telling me, the reader, about their religious identity. So direct characterization. Love required only the right conditions, like a geranium, like being used as a means of comparing two unlike things. We've got a similar economic backgrounds, financial security, belonging to the same church. These were the pillars of the married union. If we read that too literally, we'd be in trouble when we go to write the essay. That is definitely sarcastic. All right, you're an expert. If I had missed any of those, it was going to make them keep going. All right, so step 3, time to close read. Be on the lookout during your close reading for elements of language. It will help you address narrative voice, characterization, social commentary. Why do I focus on those 3 things? Look at the prompt. So read this excerpt from the short story. In a well-written essay, explain how the author uses narrative voice and characterization to provide social commentary. If you watch my previous video, in exercise 2, I talked about how AP prompts are super predictable. They have 2 parts, a what and a how. The what does your essay need to be about? So this one, social commentary. What's the commentary that's being made? And the how, what stylistic choices do I need to focus on to explain the commentary? Needs to be narrative voice and characterization techniques. So that's why I'm asking my students, as they go back to do a thorough close reading the second time they read it, don't just arbitrarily approach it. Look at what the prompt is asking for, and that should guide your close reading. All right, so if I was truly pacing this out in class, this would be where it's time for homework. So I would expect them to come into class the next day having done a second reading of this passage. Thorough close reading. I put in white font amidst the orange to highlight what I'm looking for. So come in with a closely read version of this passage, and then the next step is draft a thesis statement. So not an entire essay, one sentence that does what the College Board asked you to do. So address the prompt, insert interpretation, lend direction, and then in class the next day we'd be partnering up, comparing annotations, comparing thesis statements, and then taking the next logical steps to actually start writing. This is where I included my it ended up being a 3.5-minute video on my YouTube channel, where I mocked this approach for them, just in case they needed further support. I did not leave my annotations up on the screen for very long, or my thesis statement, because I don't simply want them to copy it. And in fact, in class, I would tell them, really only watch this if you are completely stuck, if you just don't know where to go with this assignment. And I would also post my annotations on Canvas as something that, again, if they needed to and if they really wanted to look at it closely, uh, if they need some help, because everybody, as you can imagine, in a class of about 30 students is in a different spot when it comes to their confidence with this sort of stuff. So I'd have supports ready for those who need them, but those who don't wouldn't need to watch either of these videos. I'll give you a sense of what this one sounds like. Buddy, so you've already seen this passage. You saw it earlier in this presentation. So this is the excerpt from The Other Paris by Mavis Gallen. Earlier in the presentation, I already asked you to read this over for your initial reading, just to build comprehension, asked you some comprehension-like questions. We talked about, gave you some reminders, and gave me a video to watch from the College Board of what that close reading should really look like. So at this stage, I just want to talk you through what my approach would be and actually give you a concrete example of what I mean by close reading and setting myself up to write an essay. So here's just what you would see if you turn to FRQ2. This was back in 2003, but as we've talked about all the time, FRQs 1 and 2 have two very predictable components when it comes to their prompts: the what and the how. So once I've done my first reading, which you guys have already done, all my goal was to establish key facts, comprehend as much as I could as I read through it. But the second time I go through it, that's where I need to start focusing on annotating for these specific stylistic choices that are going to help me write an effective essay. To do that, I need to make sure I start with a thesis statement that both lends direction to my essay and that clearly answers the prompt. So let's break apart the prompt. We should find a what and a how, like we've talked about. So this part in a well-written essay, that's our cue that the prompt is starting. So what we need to do is explain how the author uses narrative voice and characterization to provide social commentary. I break this apart. The what is social commentary. That's what my essay needs to focus on. The how, well, in terms of style, I need to focus on narrative voice and characterization techniques. So on a second read, I want you to compare what I did with what you did on yours, but this is what my passage looks like. Now, it's not perfect, it's not pretty, it's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but we're replicating a tense situation, so it's not going to be. But what I'm trying to do is give myself an abundance of ideas that are going to help me answer the prompt and focus on stylistic choices and not just summary. All right, this is posted on our Canvas course page under our most recent module, so this is there for you to compare yours with and just see if we had any different ideas or similar ones, or we'll discuss this tomorrow in class. All right, my last step before I actually start writing an essay is make sure that I have a thesis statement and make sure that thesis. All right, so and that's near the end of my video. So I really just wanted to do the assignment that am asking them to do for tomorrow, because, like I said, I'm trying to help out anybody who might need the additional support. All right, last slide. I would just want to recap. And so here's where I added some timeline-based animation, where I just take them through. I've explained all of this throughout this presentation, but for students, just like you would do in the classroom, you want to end a class period by reiterating what they need to know. So I would do the same thing here. And then I did have all these. I had them appear on the screen one by one, just to break apart each of the 8 steps, if you think about it, that they would need to do in advance of a class tomorrow. But then I left them after they appeared on the screen so that students could have them all right in front of them. But this helps students who need to break apart assignments, and there are some students who get overwhelmed when there's multi-step sorts of expectations. So that's why I approached this part of the presentation this way. All right, hopefully everything made some sense. Thank you for watching. On to the final project. All right, thanks.